Okay, so here we are. It is Wednesday, March 25th. We are here, part of our team at Albeit Weiker, to talk about the school closure and how it's affecting special education and services to students with disabilities. So I am Leslie Albeit. I know nothing about this department, so I'm going to be asking some questions today just from a parent perspective. And then we have Lauren here, who is a special education attorney with our group, and Danielle Randolph, who is a special education advocate, and then Mark Weiker, who is also an education attorney with us. So to start off, I just kind of generally speaking, how is the school closure affecting the required curriculum to all students? Mark.
Yeah, sure. So first we had an order that was issued by the governor and Dr. Acton indicating that schools will be closed. And that's for a period of about 3 weeks. They called it an extended spring break. And what most schools in Ohio have decided to do is provide the education online to all students. So this will be some instruction during the course of the day, which will really be a fraction of what the students receive in class now. And so obviously parents are going to have to be a part of that, directing their students to get online, supplementing that in any way that they can, and then helping with projects or assignments that flow from the online instruction. One of the issues that was recognized right away is that all students don't have access to technology at home, either because they don't have the devices or they don't have internet access. So that's something that schools are working through. I think they understand their obligation for equal access for all students. And so schools do have an obligation to provide that access in whatever way they can through equipment or internet access to students so that there is some equality in the education that's being delivered.
I think some school districts are still providing packets. I know my own child has a combination of doing online schoolwork as well as having paper products that he will have to turn in down the road. And then I know another school district that parents can come pick up packets from their general central office. And I think a lot of rural school districts are probably having to do that more so than other districts because of the Wi-Fi access. Again, my school district, they are doing a hotspot. So you can go and sit in the parking lots and get on their Wi-Fi and get their hotspot. So I think school districts are being very creative in trying to maneuver all those obstacles that parents face.
I would add too, I know teachers really care about this, and as much as this was kind of an extended spring break issued by the governor, most schools have gone back to the online, and like Mark and Danielle had said, there's kind of a lot of different things that are happening. I know some schools are doing live sessions with students, which is very challenging, especially for students with disabilities, or maybe if you're having access problems to get online, but a lot of we're doing recording, and then as well as being able to offer a type of live kind of after the fact session for students that might have questions. So there might be a recording that they can log into and do each day, but then also have the option to have a teacher face-to-face live. So that's been a really good option as well.
And so how is this going to affect IEPs and 504 plans generally?
Yeah, it's certainly more challenging to service students on IEPs or 504 plans online. The reason for that, of course, is that students on IEPs and 504 plans, well, IEPs specifically, have specially designed instruction, so that's small group or even one-to-one, or sometimes they work with a therapist or an intervention specialist. And all that obviously is a little bit more difficult to facilitate. Sometimes there are social and emotional supports for students on IEPs, instruction on behavior or following a behavior plan. And then, the IEP and certainly the 504 plan have accommodations for students, things like preferred seating or extended time on tests and assignments or supportive technology. So to deliver those things is a little bit more difficult for schools, but I think they are working through it. I think it's helpful really for parents to ask themselves really 3 questions in terms of what services their child is receiving. And I'd say the first is, can the regular instruction and the services listed on the IEP be delivered online or by telephone? And so this will require the parent to look at Section 7 of the IEP to be familiar with what's on the IEP and how those services are typically delivered. For instance, things like speech therapy or counseling, if the student had that service on the IEP, may be able to be delivered, pretty easily online or with some support online. Whereas it might be a little bit more difficult to deliver either physical therapy, which is large muscle movement, or occupational therapy, which is, handwriting, so small motor or fine motor movements. Those types of things might be more difficult to deliver online. So first you got to figure out whether or not the services that are listed on the IEP can be delivered online or not. I'd say the second question is whether or not the parent in some way can support the teacher, the therapist, the tutor, or the reading specialist, whoever it may be that's delivering the service, whether they can support that person so that the content can be delivered online. So maybe it would be difficult or impossible for an occupational therapist to provide handwriting support to a student online if they can't keep that student's attention, or they may not have access to the actual materials that the teacher is using. So I think the parent can ask themselves whether or not they can help facilitate an online session so that the service can be delivered. Now, importantly, on that second question, parents aren't required to do that. The school has to figure out how to deliver a service, whether or not the parent is helping. But I think it's important in these times to think about how we might be able to have the service delivered, or how we might be able to help the school deliver the service. And if parents have the time and the patience and the ability to help, that second question is whether or not you can help have the service delivered online. And then the third part of that, once you figure out whether it can be delivered online, either with or without you, is that if it's impossible, if it's not possible or not effective to deliver the service online, it's whether you have to determine, how much is going to be missed by that student, and how we measure the regression or the deficit once the school is back in session. So you may have to go out without the service now if it's just not possible. Although, in some cases, again, these services can be delivered online, or in some cases, some rare cases, in person. But I wouldn't panic if I were a parent or a student if it's not being delivered right now, because schools are already gearing up for measuring or considering how much the student has lost in terms of sessions with a therapist, for instance, or a counselor, how much instruction the student has lost, and then making up for that instruction either through extended school year services or compensatory education. So schools are considering that. All the guidance from the U.S. Department of Education and the State Department of Education has indicated that schools are going to have to consider these deficits when school resumes.
You guys have anything to add?
I would just add, the district still does need to be making the good faith effort to provide FAPE, the free appropriate public education requirements, for students with disabilities. And I think most districts are trying really hard to do that. I know Danielle and I were talking earlier about, there is talk in some special education teams with some districts about potentially, basically calling an IEP meeting, calling parents, and amending the IEP to actually decrease some of the minutes that are offered for some of those related services, or direct one-on-one support. And, I think the idea being is schools still want to be able to uphold that IEP and document and do their best, but realizing that some of those minutes just are not going to be able to be served, like Mark had said, kind of right now, especially maybe not in person the way that they normally would be. And so, decreasing some of those minutes, but the idea being that, when school would go back to, you know, hold another IEP to amend it again, to go back to the minutes that were initially offered, as well as potentially offering compensatory services once school, you know, is back to a more traditional schedule.
So that's a good segue into my next question. So schools still should be having IEP meetings, and what do those look like right now? Maybe
State is saying that you still have to follow those timelines. And so when you look at an evaluation team report, you still have that timeline to meet. The state is saying that all of the initial evaluations should be completed. So that 60-day timeline from consent to meeting, that you still need to be finishing your initial evaluations during that time. And then with reevaluations, which you have to just meet that 3-year deadline, you're supposed to try your best to meet that deadline, but you can have, you can just waive the reevaluation. That is a legally binding document. You just sign a waiver without doing anything new. You can have a parent waive their right to the reevaluation, so they revoke consent to do it. You can also just do a record review that doesn't require any one-on-one testing or observations. So there are a lot of different things that school sites can do to try to stick with that timeline. I know some districts are just saying, hey, we're trying, but we're going to be out of compliance for these and deal with that later. With the IEP, same thing. The state is saying you still have to follow that deadline. You can't use this as an excuse not to have that IEP meeting within that year mark.
So what do the IEP meetings look like? Are they online? I mean, is it like this situation we're doing right now?
Yes. Yeah, mostly yes. And again, there are some rural school districts that are dealing with parents who don't have Wi-Fi, who don't have a computer, who don't have a smartphone. And what do you do in that instance? You're just sort of having, on the phone with someone and then conferencing someone else in, and it doesn't look pretty, but it gets the job done. So I think districts, again, are just trying to do what they can do to make it work.
Okay. So what should a parent do if they are missing services? How can they even get started in talking with the school?
Yeah, I think kind of going through that 3-question analysis. So is it possible for this service to be provided remotely in some way? Can I help it be provided remotely in some way? And then if it's not, how do I measure the regression? And, within those 3 questions is, okay, I may have to contact the school to see what their plan is in terms of delivering the content remotely. If their physical therapist is available in some way to do it remotely, if their occupational therapist, speech therapist, intervention specialists, so on and so forth, are available. So it does take some communication with the school. I would say be patient with the school, but and be clear in your communications in terms of what you're asking for. But if you're not receiving the services, you can't help receive the services, and it's not possible, then you really have to look to starting to measure what you're missing. So you got to look at the IEP and see what sessions you're missing, and then measure the regression. And to follow up on what both Lauren and Danielle said, there are some great tools online to measure regression. You don't have to be perfectly precise in measuring it, but just in terms of educational instruction and other social and emotional supports, there are ways to measure it. Certainly one easy way is just, again, to count the sessions that you're missing. And if you do amend or agree to amend the IEP and reduce the minutes for a therapy or a service, like Lauren mentioned, I would say just certainly make a note that you're doing that as some part of an agreement that those minutes would be made up later.
Mm-hmm. So ask for that PRO1.
Right.
So if there are changes made, does that require a new IEP meeting to make that change, or how does that look? Yeah, good question. It would require a meeting, but again, that meeting could be held virtually. You can also, the requirements for participants in the meetings have also not changed. So, you're typically talking about the parent, the student, if that's appropriate, the regular education teacher, special education teacher, school psychologist, district rep, sometimes any therapist. But so you have a whole team of people that have to meet virtually, either telephonically or through Zoom or Skype. And but you can waive some participants. If you're having a problem
getting a participant or two at the meeting, you can waive that as the parent, and still have the meeting and then amend the IEP, and that you can get information from those people outside of that and get approval for the amendments from the entire team.
And I would say, these virtual IEP meetings or over the telephone probably are not going to look obviously or be as robust as normally. Sometimes we go to IEP meetings and, the school district has maybe 10, 12, 14 different participants there, that they're not all mandated to be there, right? It might be multiple of the general education teachers when they only need to have one, or multiple of the special education team, just because, they really care about the student and they want to be able to provide the student and the parents with, data and with reporting from those teachers, about strengths and areas that the student can improve upon in those classes. So again, these meetings might not be as robust as you're used to, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the school's out of compliance.
So home instruction. So for students who are already receiving home instruction, is that continuing, or what have you heard?
I have not seen specific guidance that looks at just homeschool students. However, they're on an IEP, so I would advise that district needs to be doing what they're doing for all kids on IEPs. And so maybe we're adjusting and not having a home instructor out at the home, and now we're doing more of the virtual e-learning, direct instruction. However, again, the state and federal government are saying that school officials can still work one-on-one with students. So I do not think that they would say you can have a home instructor, but whatever's comfortable, with that relationship between the parent, the family, and the home instructor. If they feel like now is not a good time to have that one-on-one interaction because of the COVID-19, then I think the district then needs to be flexible in providing that instruction, different format.
Yeah, good point. The one thing, if you ultimately end up missing home instruction sessions, which inevitably is going to happen if you're receiving home instruction, you would be entitled to some, extended school year compensatory education to make up for those. That's, may not be an easy thing to hear now, that it's going to be made up later, but that can be worked out. And the other thing, I think specifically in Ohio, what schools are dealing with is, first around March 12th, we had the school closure for about 3 weeks, which we think might be extended. And then, so there was a lot of guidance that came out, just after March 12th, and this came out both nationally and statewide to talk about what schools could do. And then more recently, on March 22nd, we had the stay at home or shelter in place order by the governor of Ohio and Dr. Acton. And so schools had to consider what that said. And although schools were deemed to be an essential business so that they could continue to operate, it was for the purpose of providing online instruction. And if there had to be in-person interactions, according to this order, then you have to maintain this social distancing rule, which was keep 6 feet away. Well, obviously, if you're going to receive home instruction, which is still possible, like Danielle said, at least under this order in Ohio, as of March 22nd, you have to stay 6 feet away from the student. So at that point, you might as well consider online instruction if it's possible, or online instruction with the support of the parent in some way, or again, looking at the third question, what do I have to do to keep track of what we're missing so that we can make that up when school resumes?
Mm-hmm. And I have seen a lot of healthcare providers actually, still going into homes. So potentially some of them are more private, and I have seen quite a few families actually, kind of reaching out to the school and on their own behalf. Now, parents do not have to do this if they're getting, for example, counseling at school. They don't have to go the private route, but I have seen some parents do that where they've, connected with the school and said, hey, we really want our students to still be receiving counseling. Is there, somebody you recommend maybe, outside of school? And I've had some kids start kind of doing the telehealth counseling, and they love it. Again, that is not something that parents are required to do, and that's up to them. But I know that there are still quite a few providers that are going into homes because the healthcare that is still essential. you know, and sometimes maybe it's being canceled because parents are choosing to cancel in these few weeks here out of safety purposes. You know, but that's the reality is, can it be done safely for everybody? And like Mark said, you know, the social distancing, all the things that we've heard that are just, you know, good guidance that we should be doing anyway. So, you know, that's the reality when it comes to these different related services and home instruction. And, you know, what we tell people is, you know, document what you're missing, and how things are going. I know it's challenging times for everybody, but just, you know, being able to show, this is kind of, you know, what we've been able to get, and this is what, you know, we have been missing out, is going to help in the long run.
So kind of general takeaways from what I'm understanding is that parents, well, it's hard for everybody. It's hard on the parent side, it's hard on the student side, and it's hard on the school side. So parents should be resourceful in coming up maybe with some ideas on how they can help their student and how they can, you know, present solutions to the school, but then also know that they do need to still speak up and get those services for their kids, even though it's going to look different. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I mean, parents should contact the school to see what, you know, what the next step is in terms of changing or amending those services so that they are delivered. But I think they should be, you know, appreciative, cooperative, and creative in terms of approaching the school and figuring this out. You know, teachers and principals and special education directors and therapists are all dealing with this personally and professionally in their own ways. So be respectful in how you do that, and a little bit patient on how those amendments are made, and then, and be patient with the services that may have to be delivered later in the form of compensatory education or extended school year.
Okay. Well, if there's nothing else to add, I would just encourage anyone who's watching, if you do have further questions or more specific questions, to give us a call. We are still working, although we're all in our, you get to see everybody's houses, but we are all still available for phone or video consults. And we will be here every day and however we can help you.
Leslie, there may be some question about testing, state testing. And there hasn't been anything determinative yet, but all indicators from both the governor and the state superintendent are that the state testing requirements will be waived for schools and students. So, third grade reading guarantee won't apply this year, so students won't be held back into third grade if they haven't been able to take the test. And then other state testing requirements are going to be waived. And this is important, of course, for seniors, high school seniors, who may have other graduation requirements to meet. All indicators are from the press conferences and the public statements that those requirements will be waived so that seniors can graduate.
So testing waived or postponed till next year, or we don't know?
Well, for high school seniors, the requirements will most likely be waived. They haven't said for sure, but again, indicators during press releases and press conferences have indicated that they're going to allow seniors to graduate. If the reason they wouldn't have graduated was this COVID-19 closure, they'll allow them to graduate. They should still complete, projects and, outside of school activities like internships if they can, to the extent they can, group projects. But so long as they continue on that path, all indicators are is that they'll graduate and students won't be held back from advancing to the next grade or be required to pass state tests for this year.
Have you read anything about the end of course exams? Because although those are state assessments, I'm just wondering why you're talking about it. I wonder, and those could be delivered, I would think, via e-learning. Have you read anything specifically about the end of course exams?
The only thing I've heard about exams is that they may, even though they could be delivered online, they might not be in the controlled environment that they would need to have students take them. So I don't know what the outcome will be on that, but it sounds like at least all of the testing requirements will be postponed or waived for the year.
There are actual software programs that kind of put computers on lockdown or iPads, things like that, but they're pretty costly. So a few districts might end up going that route, but I would assume unless it's like a college or university, most of them would not be offering that type of thing. I know for our college kids, I've had a couple questions this week since admissions letters have gone out and students are kind of finding out if they're accepted to colleges and universities, and there's a lot of unknown and stress about that for high school seniors. So my advice to you would be reach out to those schools, especially if it's a school that is on the top of your list, and you were accepted to and you're interested in going there and you weren't able to do a tour. I know a lot of schools are working on coming up with virtual tours, and they really want you to be able to reach out with alumni and current students, professors, whoever you need to talk to kind of be able to make that final decision for yourself. So please know that colleges and universities are also working on all of these things, and they still want to admit students on time and in the way that they would do to the best of their ability for the upcoming fall. So I know that's really stressful, and your senior year might not look like you had initially envisioned, but know that the goal is still for those schools to provide you with every and any answer to questions that you might have, and do a virtual tour so you can kind of still get a really good feel and idea of it. And then of course, if the college is within driving distance, a lot of students are just kind of doing their own little in the car tour with their family if they weren't able to kind of do a more formal tour, as well as then some type of virtual tour with the admissions office. So that's an option as well.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks, guys. And we will hopefully see each other soon.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Bye.